The morning my ex-wife was buried, I wore the same grey suit I'd owned for 12 years. The cuffs were starting to fray. I noticed it that morning while I was knotting my tie in the bathroom of my one-bedroom apartment in Queens, and I thought about whether I should buy a new one for the will reading next week. Then I thought about my checking account and decided the fraying didn't matter. Nobody at that funeral was going to look at me long enough to notice. I was right about that. My son saw me first. He was standing near the casket talking to one of his mother's business partners, a woman in pearls who had once told me at a Christmas party in 1998 that I was lucky to have married up. My son saw me, and his face did this thing it always did when I showed up somewhere I wasn't expected, a small tightening, like he was bracing for embarrassment. He walked over. He didn't hug me. "Dad, you came." "Of course I came. She was your mother. I just figured, you know." "After everything." I didn't answer that. There's nothing to say to a sentence like, "after everything," when the everything in question is your own life. He looked at my suit. He looked at my shoes. He didn't say anything about either, but I watched the calculation move across his face the way it had moved across his face, the way it had moved across his face for 20 years. Ever since he was old enough to understand that his father drove a Honda and his mother drove a Mercedes, and that this difference meant something about who we were. His name is, well, I'll just call him my son. That's what he is. That's what he stays, no matter what he says or does. My son. He walked away to greet someone more important. The service was at a Presbyterian church in Greenwich, Connecticut. I had not been inside that church before. My ex-wife and I had been married in a small civil ceremony in 1981, in a courthouse in Hartford, when we had nothing. And I mean nothing. She wore a dress she bought at Filene's basement for $68. I wore a tie my brother had loaned me. We split a sandwich for our wedding lunch because we couldn't afford to, but by the time she died, she belonged to a church in Greenwich where the pews had little brass nameplates and the organist had studied at Juilliard. I sat in the back. Nobody asked me to sit closer. After the burial, there was a reception at her house. Not our house. Her house, a 6-bedroom colonial on 3 acres. I'd seen it maybe 4 times in the last 15 years, always when I was dropping our son off as a teenager. I'd never been past the foyer. That afternoon, I was past the foyer. I was in the dining room, holding a small plate of cheese cubes, trying to be invisible when my son found me again. This time he had his fiancée with him, a young woman from Manhattan whose father owned a chain of car dealerships. I had met her twice. Both times she had looked at me the way you look at a stain on a couch you don't own. My son had a glass of wine. I could tell from his shoulders he'd already had more than one. "Dad, can we talk?" "Sure, son." He pulled me into the hallway, near a coat closet. His fiancée stayed behind in the dining room, but I saw her watching us from across the buffet table. "Listen," he said. "I want to talk to you about Mom's will. The reading is next week." "Right, next week. But I think we should be realistic about expectations." I looked at him. My boy. I helped him learn to ride a bike on a sidewalk in West Hartford in 1989. I held the back of his Schwinn for an hour and a half until he could pedal on his own. He fell 3 times and cried twice, and the 3rd time he didn't cry because he was finally riding. I looked at him standing there in a suit that cost more than my rent, and I said, "What do you mean, son?" "I mean, Mom built this." He gestured at the house, at the chandelier, at the catering staff in white shirts. "She built the company. She built all of this. And I helped her the last 6 years. You weren't part of any of it. I'm aware of that. So I just want to make sure we're on the same page about expectations. Because if you come into next week thinking you're walking out with, I don't know, a chunk of the estate, that's not realistic. That's not what she wanted. That's not what's fair." "What's fair?" He looked at me like I was being slow. "Dad, you haven't been part of her life in 22 years. You drove a school bus. I taught computer science at a community college. Same thing. It wasn't. But I didn't correct him. And you let her do everything. The company. Raising me, basically. You weren't around, and now she's gone, and the estate it's significant. 45 million significant. So I just don't want you to be embarrassed next week when the lawyer reads the will and you're not in it. Or you're in it for like $10,000 or something. I don't want you to make a scene. I won't make a scene, you promise? I promise. He nodded. He looked relieved. He clapped me on the shoulder the way men do at funerals. That strange formal pat that means we're related, but we're not close. And he said, I appreciate it, Dad. I really do. Mum would appreciate it. He walked back to his fiancée. I heard her ask him, quietly, was he okay? He'll be fine, my son said. He gets it. I stood in the hallway for another minute, holding my plate of cheese, and I thought about the summer of 1986. I thought about my ex-wife sitting on the floor of our apartment in Hartford, eating cold lamine out of the container, looking at the legal pad where I had written down what I was building. The first draft of the inventory architecture, the original logic for what would later be called the smart routing system. She'd looked up at me with sauce on her chin and said, Honey, this is going to change everything. This is going to be ours. Ours. I put the plate down on a side table, and I left the reception. I drove back to Queens. I took off the grey suit and hung it up. The cuffs were definitely fraying. I sat down at my kitchen table and looked at the cardboard box on the floor next to the radiator. I kept it under my bed since 2003. Original notebooks, spiral-bound, college-ruled, my handwriting in blue pen on every page. Date stamps from 1985 to 1989. Schematics, pseudocode. The first draft of the patent application that became patent number 524789-1, filed in 1991, signed to a company called Northbridge Logistics, the company my ex-wife sold for $45 million in 2019. I hadn't opened the box in years. I didn't open it that night either. I just looked at it for a while, and then I made myself a peanut butter sandwich, and I went to bed. 3 days later, I got a phone call from a man named Mr. Arenberg. He said he was a senior partner at a firm in New Haven and that he had been my ex-wife's personal attorney for the last 11 years. He asked if I had a few minutes to speak privately, and I said I did, and he asked me a question that surprised me. Sir, do you still have any of your original development materials from the early years of Northbridge? Notebooks, schematics, anything from the period of 1985 to 1990. I sat down. I looked at the cardboard box. Why are you asking me that? Your ex-wife instructed me to ask you. It's part of what she left behind. Sir, I'm going to be direct with you. There are things in her will that are going to surprise people next Tuesday. I want to make sure you're prepared. Can we meet somewhere private before the reading? We met at a diner off the Merritt Parkway. He was a small man in his 60s with thick glasses and a soft, careful voice. He ordered black coffee. I ordered nothing. He opened a leather folder and slid an envelope across the table. She wrote you a letter. She asked me to give it to you before the reading. She wanted you to have time to read it alone. Take your time. I'll wait. I took the envelope. My name was on the front in her handwriting, the same loopy cursive she'd used to write notes in my lunches in 1983. I opened it. The letter was 4 pages. I read it twice. She wrote that she was sorry. She wrote it 28 times, in 4 pages, in different ways. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. She wrote about the spring of 1992, a year after the patent was granted, when her father, my father-in-law, a man who had never liked me, who had told her on our wedding day that she was throwing her life away, offered to buy out the company and put her name on it as the sole founder. She had said yes. She said yes because she was 28 and ambitious, and her father was offering her a real future, and I was, in her words, quiet about it. You didn't fight. You just let me have it. She said she had told herself for years that if I had wanted to fight, she would have stopped him. But I never fought. So she let it happen. So she let it happen. So she let her father rewrite the company history in the press releases. So she let our son grow up believing his mother was the brilliant founder and his father was the man who couldn't keep up. She wrote, I watched our son look at you the way my father looked at you, and I told myself it didn't matter because you didn't seem to mind. But you minded, you must have minded, and I let it keep happening because I was a coward. She wrote that the cancer had given her a year to think. She wrote that she had spent that year going through old files in her office, and she had found a duplicate of one of my original notebooks, a copy I had given her in 1987 as a gift, with a stupid handwritten dedication on the front page. To my partner. For the company we'll build together. Yours. She wrote that she had cried for 6 hours when she found it. She wrote that the will was going to fix what she could fix. She wrote, I know it's not enough. I know nothing is enough. But please come on Tuesday. Please let our son see who you are. Please let him see what I never let him see. I sat in that diner for a long time after I finished the letter. Mr. Arnberg let me sit. Eventually I asked him, did our son know about any of this? No, sir. She instructed me explicitly. He learns on Tuesday, with everyone else. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. I asked him what he needed me to bring on Tuesday. Bring the notebooks, he said, all of them, the ones she mentioned. There's going to be a challenge, almost certainly, and we want to be ready. A challenge from who? He looked at me kindly. From your son, sir, and from the lawyer his fiancée's family has already retained. The will reading was held at Mr. Orenberg's offices in New Haven, a long conference room with windows overlooking the green. There were 11 of us at the table. My son sat at one end with his fiancée and an attorney from a firm in Stamford whose suit was so well tailored it looked like a costume. There were 2 cousins, an aunt, the company's former CFO, and a representative from a charitable foundation. I sat at the other end. I had brought a banker's box. My son saw the box and frowned. He whispered something to his attorney. The attorney whispered back. Mr. Orenberg cleared his throat. Thank you all for coming. This is the last will and testament of my client. I'll read the relevant portions and then we'll address questions. He read for about 20 minutes. Bequests to the cousins. Bequests to 2 old friends. 2 million to the charitable foundation that funded scholarships for first-generation engineering students. The house in Greenwich went to my son, free and clear, along with its contents and a trust for property tax and maintenance for 30 years. I watched my son's face relax when that part was read. He glanced at his fiancée. She squeezed his hand. Then Mr. Arnberg turned the page. Regarding the disposition of the controlling interest in Northbridge Logistics, including all proceeds, assets, intellectual property rights, residual licensing income, and ancillary holdings, totaling, as of the date of this will, approximately $38 million. The room got very quiet. I, the undersigned, hereby acknowledge that the foundational intellectual property of Northbridge Logistics, including but not limited to the smart routing architecture covered under U.S. Patent 5,247,089-1, was developed in its entirety by my former husband prior to and during the early years of our marriage. I acknowledge that I and my late father took steps in 1992 that obscured this fact in the public and corporate record. I acknowledge that this was wrong. It is my final wish to correct it. I heard my son say very quietly, "What?" Mr. Arnberg kept reading. I therefore bequeath the entirety of my interest in Northbridge Logistics, financial, intellectual, and reputational, to my former husband, in full and without restriction. To my son, I bequeath $1 accompanied by the contents of the safe deposit box at the First National branch on Elm Street, the key to which is in this folder. I love him. He will understand why, in time. My son stood up. He sat back down. He stood up again. This is a joke. His attorney put a hand on his arm. Sit down, please. This is fraud. This is fraud. There's no way she would never do this. His attorney was already pulling out a notepad. Mr. Arneberg will be contesting this, effective immediately, on grounds of mental incapacity, undue influence. Mr. Calloway, Mr. Dew, Arneberg said gently, that's the attorney's name. Calloway, I remember now, because I wrote it down later. Your client's mother executed this will 14 months ago, when she was cancer-free and had received a full neuropsychological evaluation as a precaution, the results of which I have here. She executed it in front of 3 witnesses. including a sitting judge of the Connecticut Superior Court. She also recorded a 40-minute video deposition explaining her reasoning, which we are prepared to enter into evidence in any proceeding you'd care to bring. As for the undue influence claim, her former husband had not been in her home or in private contact with her in over 15 years. I'd encourage you to think carefully about how that particular argument plays in court. My son looked at me. For the first time in maybe a decade, he actually looked at me. Dad, what is this? What did you do? I didn't do anything, son. You must have done something. She would never. The company was hers. The company was always hers. She built that with Grandpa. From nothing. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows that. I opened the banker's box. I took out the first notebook. The cover was soft with age. I had labeled it in marker in 1985, Northbridge. Core logic, V1. Son, do you want to see what your father did? He stared at the notebook. His attorney said, don't engage. I opened the notebook to a page I had marked with a yellow tab. I turned it around so he could see. The page was dated September 14th, 1985. The handwriting was mine. The diagram on the page was the original schematic for the routing algorithm. In the bottom right corner, in different ink, in his mother's handwriting, was a note. It said, "Honey, this is brilliant. L." My son looked at the page for a long time. His face did something I had never seen it do before. It went still, not angry, not defensive, just still, the way a face goes still when it understands something and isn't ready to. There are 11 more notebooks, I said. There's the original draft of the patent application with my name on it from 1989. There's a letter from your grandfather to your mother dated April of 1992 explaining what he wanted her to do and why. She kept that letter, son. She kept all of it. I think she always knew this day would come. I think she just didn't know how. He sat down. His fiancée said, "Honey, we should leave. We should leave right now. We can deal with this later." He didn't move. He was still looking at the notebook. His attorney was now standing. "We'll be in touch, Mr. Arnberg. This isn't over." "Of course, Mr. Arnberg. This isn't over." "Of course," Arnberg said, polite as a Sunday school teacher. "Take all the time you need." The fiancé pulled my son out of the chair. He went, but he kept looking back at the box on the table, at the notebook, at me. They left. The conference room emptied slowly, cousins shaking hands with me, awkward, congratulatory in a way I didn't know how to receive. The CFO leaned in and said, "I always wondered. I worked there for 19 years, sir. I always wondered why your name was nowhere in the documents. Welcome back." I didn't know what to say. I shook his hand. When everyone was gone, Mr. Arnberg sat across from me with his coffee and his folder. "There's one more thing she wanted me to give you." He slid a small wrapped package across the table. I opened it. It was a framed photograph. A photograph I had not seen in 33 years. It was the two of us in our apartment in Hartford in 1987. I was sitting at the kitchen table with one of the notebooks open in front of me. She was standing behind me with her chin on top of my head, both of us laughing at something. I don't remember what we were laughing at. I don't remember who took the picture. I had assumed every copy of it had been thrown away decades ago. On the back of the frame, in her handwriting, she had written, "The truth was always in this picture. I'm sorry it took me 40 years to put it back where it belonged." I drove home to Queens that night. I didn't go to a hotel, even though I could have afforded any hotel in Manhattan now. I went home. I sat at my kitchen table. I looked at my fraying suit on its hanger by the door. I ate a peanut butter sandwich, because that's what I had in the apartment. And I thought about my son. 2 weeks later, he showed up at my apartment. He didn't call first. He just rang the buzzer at 9:30 on a Saturday morning. I let him up. He stood in my living room in a hoodie and jeans and looked around at the size of the place and didn't say anything for a long time. He had never been to this apartment. I had moved in 9 years ago. Finally, he said, "Why didn't you ever tell me? You wouldn't have believed me. I might have. You wouldn't have. You wouldn't have. You knew me as the man your mother had outgrown. That was the story you grew up inside of. I couldn't have changed it by talking. You had to see it for yourself. He sat down on my couch. The couch was from 2011. The cushions had a permanent dent on the right side from where I sat. The lawyer says I can't win the case, he said. Calloway. He says, the evidence is. He says, it's not even close. He says I'd embarrass myself. He's right. I don't even want to bring it. Dad, I don't know what to do. I don't know who I am right now. Everything I thought about her. Everything I thought about her. Everything I thought about you. It's all. He stopped. He put his hands over his face. He sat like that for maybe 2 minutes. I didn't say anything. I didn't move. I watched my 35-year-old son cry for the first time since he was 11, on my couch in Queens, on a Saturday morning, wearing a hoodie that probably cost more than my refrigerator. When he was done, he wiped his face with the back of his hand and said, "What do I do, Dad?" "You eat. Have you eaten?" "No." I made him eggs. I made him toast. He ate sitting at my kitchen table, the same table where I had been sitting the night his mother died, and he asked me, between bites, slowly, about the company. About 1985. About what it had been like to build something and watch someone else's name go on it. About why I never fought, about what happened after the divorce. About the years of teaching at the community college, about whether I had been happy. I answered him honestly, all of it, including the parts where I had been wrong, where I had let pride and exhaustion keep me silent for far too long, where I should have, at minimum, told him the truth myself, regardless of what his mother said when he was old enough to hear it. I told him I was sorry for that. He said he understood. He said he wasn't sure he forgave me yet, but he understood, and he wanted to try, and he asked if I would be willing to try too. I said yes. He came back the next Saturday, and the Saturday after that, he started bringing groceries. Too many groceries, the way rich kids do, like they don't know how a refrigerator works. He started asking me to teach him things, real things, about the company he was now going to inherit a small consulting role in because I'd asked Mr. Time, Aaron Bird, to put him on payroll at a junior level so he could learn it from the bottom up. About code, about logic, about how to read a patent. He was bad at all of it at first. He got better. He's still getting better. His fiancée, by the way, called off the engagement 4 months after the will was read. He told me about it on a Sunday in November, sitting on my couch eating Chinese takeout. He said it almost casually. He said, "Turns out she was real interested in the version of me that owned a $45 million company, less interested in the other version." I said I was sorry. He shrugged. He said, "Nah. Mom did me a favor." He calls his mother Mom now in a different way. Not the way he used to, the way you talk about a person who was complicated, and who you loved, and who hurt people, and who tried, at the end, to make it right. The way you talk about a real human being instead of a monument. I'm 63 years old. I bought a new suit last spring. The cuffs aren't fraying. I still live in the apartment in Queens because I like it here, and because moving felt like erasing the years I'd lived through, and I'm not interested in erasing anything anymore. I drive a slightly nicer car. I helped pay off my brother's mortgage. I funded 2 scholarships at the community college where I used to teach, in my ex-wife's name, because she would have wanted that, and because forgiveness, it turns out, is something you do for yourself even more than for the person you're forgiving. My son and I had dinner last night. He picked the restaurant. He paid. He told me about a problem he was working on at the company, a real engineering problem, something I would have killed to be working on at his age, and he asked for my opinion, and I gave it, and he wrote it down in a little notebook he carries now, a spiral-bound, college-ruled notebook, same kind I used to use. When he left, he hugged me. A real hug, not the funeral pat. I walked home through the November cold. The photograph on my kitchen counter, the one of us in 1987, her chin on top of my head, both of us laughing at something we don't remember. The truth was always in that picture she'd written. It just took 40 years to find its way home. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's just outliving the lie long enough to see the truth set the table for everyone, in its own time, in its own way. That, in the end, is the only kind of justice I ever wanted. I think about that morning in the conference room a lot. Not the moment my son's face went still when he saw the notebook. Not even the part where the lawyer read out the dollar. What I think about most is the version of myself who sat in that fraying grey suit and almost didn't go, who almost let the lie keep standing because correcting it felt too tiring after 4 decades. Here's what I learned. And I learned it the hard way. The slow way. The way that costs you 22 years of your son's respect. Before you finally get it back, cause and effect doesn't wait for you to be ready. Every time I stayed quiet in 1992, every time I let the bride's father rewrite the company history without saying a word, every time I let my boy grow up watching me shrink, I was planting the exact tree I would have to sit under for the rest of my life. The silence I chose at 30 wasn't free. It cost me my son at 15, at 20, at 30. I paid for it in installments I didn't know I was signing up for. People talk about karma like it's some cosmic accountant. It isn't. It's just consequence. The stories we let other people tell about us become the stories our children inherit, and our children grow up to treat us according to the script we let stand. If I could go back and say one thing to the man I was in 1992, it would be this. Being humble is not the same as being silent. Being patient is not the same as disappearing. There is a kind of decency that turns into self-erasure if you don't watch it, and self-erasure isn't a virtue. It's a slow betrayal of the people who needed to know who you really were. My son needed a father who told him the truth about himself, and I gave him a father who let other people write the captions. That was on me. Not entirely, but partly. And I had to own that part before I could ask him to own his. So if you take anything from what I just told you, take this. Build the courage to speak before the will does it for you. Build the integrity to name what's yours without apologizing for it. Build the strength to keep going when nobody knows what you're capable of yet. Decency without backbone becomes a doormat. Intelligence without voice becomes a wasted gift. Endurance without purpose becomes just another word for hiding. My son sits across from me now with a spiral notebook and a pen, asking real questions, learning the work. Lorraine, in the end, did the hardest thing a person can do, which is admit she was wrong while she still had time to say it out loud. Marcus is becoming the man he should have been allowed to become 20 years sooner. And me, at 63, I'm finally telling the truth in my own voice. It's late, but late is not the same as never. Late, it turns out, still counts.